Yeah, he's right there. Mystery solved. Jokes aside, I always thought the concept of tempo was an interesting breakdown in pretty much any card game. It especially piqued my interest in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it's an extremely overlooked concept in this game, to the point to where it's a pretty common sub-meme in this community that tempo just outright doesn't exist in this game. But I'm here to make an argument that it does exist. But this isn't an easy concept to understand. And I think it doesn't help the case when Magic players join in on the conversation and then they define tempo wrong. Now, by no means am I calling anyone dumb. This is actually digging really deep into the weeds of TCG gameplay theory. Like, to those of you who say that tempo has something to do with having more creatures than your opponent or having more mana than your opponent, you're right, but that's not the whole picture. So what I want to do is break down what exactly tempo is, how it applies to Yu-Gi-Oh!, and we'll actually look at some live examples as well to see these theories in practice. So let's start by defining what tempo actually is, because like I said, this is a very advanced topic. And I know I've only been back into Yu-Gi-Oh! For a couple months now, but I've been playing competitive card games for, 20 years at this point. And even as someone who's played card games competitively for basically their entire life, this concept is still extremely hard for me to explain to people. So I'll do my best to explain it in a way that a lot of people can understand without short-circuiting your brains. Because I know when I was explaining this idea to some of my friends, I short-circuited their brains. But in its simplest and purest form, tempo is the momentum and the pace of the game. And when you're trying to figure out which player has the tempo advantage and which player doesn't, there's actually a pretty easy way to try to remember it. So the player who's making plays that actively works towards their own win condition is the player who controls the tempo. Where the person with the tempo disadvantage is the person who's responding to their opponent instead of making plays that actively progresses their game plan. Which is where I want to debunk the first thing that people say about tempo in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where there's not enough turns in Yu-Gi-Oh! For there to be tempo. Just because Yu-Gi-Oh! Goes at 150 miles an hour compared to other games, it doesn't mean that there's not a pace. With Yu-Gi-Oh! The tempo shifts happen multiple times in a single turn, instead of being spread out across multiple turns. Which I don't think is a bad thing, but it just makes it a little harder to identify. But let's dig into this definition just a little bit further now. There's 4 main aspects to tempo: proactivity, gameplay presence, resource efficiency, and then the tempo swing itself. And we'll start with proactivity because it's literally the thing we just talked about. This is the concept that the player with the superior tempo sets the pace of the game. And I say sets the pace of the game because it shouldn't be confused with just playing fast. Like if a control deck or a stun deck grinds the game to a sluggish halt, they still have the tempo control because we're playing at their pace. And even though Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks are known to be fast and explosive, they still want to play at their own pace relative to the speed of the game. Some decks prefer grind games, some decks are all or nothing combo decks, and some decks kind of sit in the middle. Like a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Might be going 100 miles an hour compared to a Magic game, but then there's another deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Going 200 miles an hour. It's all relative to the game you're actually playing. Next, let's jump into gameplay presence. Gameplay presence is about having active threats or resources that dictate the flow of the game. Now, it's important to note that this specifically refers to active threats in the game, not unknown threats. So something like a cheeky Ash Blossom or a counterspell is not a tempo swing card. The opponent either has the extender or they don't, but Ash Blossom isn't dictating how they play up until that point. But on the flip side, gameplay presence also includes perceived threats, like bluffs, for example. Like if a bluff forces your opponent to play differently than they normally would have, then in a way it did win you tempo. And a lot of this concept is mind games and how much you can make your opponent react to your cards. It's not so much just counting the amount of interactions you have and weighing them against the amount of extenders the opponent has. Now the third aspect is resource efficiency, which I think is the one that causes the most confusion when it comes to explaining what tempo is. Like Magic players will hear the word tempo, and they'll relate it to how much mana they have and how far ahead they are of their opponent. Hearthstone players might hear tempo and relate it to how well a minion can trade into multiple cards. And in Yu-Gi-Oh!, resource efficiency is normally tied to the idea of getting value, which is actually a really common misconception because in order to gain a tempo swing, you usually have to give up card advantage. So the two are really not the same thing. In terms of tempo, when we talk about resource efficiency, we're actually talking about cards that are able to remove a threat while also being a threat of their own. And a good example for both points, I think, is Dracotail Arthelion. Because there are definitely times with Arthelion where you need to eat a card advantage loss because you need to fuse away multiple cards in your hand to win the board back, and that's okay. And at the same time, Arthelion isn't just removal. He's a body that can be converted into more interruption or just damage to try to close out a game. So when we're talking about resource efficiency as far as tempo is concerned, try to keep that in mind, that it usually has to produce an active threat on top of being a form of removal. And Arthelion was just the first example that popped into my head. There's actually a ton of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That are very tempo efficient. And there's some cards that I even think were specifically designed to win tempo, which we'll get to later. Which brings us to the fourth aspect of tempo, which is the tempo swing itself. And in its simplest form, the tempo shift is when the momentum of play shifts to the other player. I know, super deep and informative, but it is something to consider. While everyone may not agree with the terminology, I know everyone here has felt a tempo shift at least once in their games. If you've ever gone second and tried to break through a board, that moment where you're able to start resolving your cards, that's the tempo shift moment. And honestly, it's a really oversimplified explanation because tempo shifts on a scale. It's not just a case of you have it or you don't. And again, really the easiest way to figure out who has the tempo advantage is to ask yourself, am I responding to the opponent or is the opponent responding to me? And if that role changes at any point in the game, then at some point there was a tempo shift. But after having this brief description of what tempo is out of the way, let's talk about how it applies to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because after all, isn't this the game where your opponent just combos you into the sun, and if you don't have a hand trap, you scoop? And while there are games like that, I don't think that's entirely the case. That mindset is more just a symptom of Master Duel being a best of one format. The systems Master Duel has in place rewards the player for conceding and hopping into a new game, instead of just playing out the game that they're in. Which can honestly be a whole video in itself, because I do think it's a little weird how Master Duel doesn't incentivize playing out the mid-game. But to me, there's three major situations in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where understanding tempo and tempo manipulation can be a big benefit to you. And that's when you're going second, in mirror matches, and in simplified board states. And we'll start with the easiest one to understand, which is when you're going second. Now, this isn't something that's unique to Yu-Gi-Oh! Every card game I've ever played in my life, the going first player has the tempo advantage. That's just how it is. It's always on the burden of the going second player to win that tempo back. And a lot of people will say the going second player has the advantage of having an extra card, but that really only matters if that card is used to disrupt your opponent's momentum and not just be played for value. Realistically, the only goal of the going second player is to win the tempo back and take control of the game. Like focusing on some sort of OTK line or actually resolving your own combo lines should come secondary to actually gaining the tempo back. With mirror matches, tempo matters in a very different way. And I think a part of the reason why Yu-Gi-Oh! Players love a good mirror match is because a mirror match is purely a tempo game. Because when both players are playing the same deck, neither player has an inherent advantage with the quality of their cards versus their opponent's cards. And instead, mirror matches are usually decided by the player who's able to force their opponent into a disadvantageous or a reactive position. And the way you win tempo in a mirror match is by breaking parity. And once you gain that tempo advantage, it's all about holding on to it, because the longer you can hold on to the tempo advantage, the more often you can force your opponent into making suboptimal plays. And eventually that tempo lead grows to a point to where the opponent can't overcome it, and that's how you usually win the mirror match. And the idea of breaking parity to win tempo goes hand in hand with a concept called exploiting snowball mechanics, which we'll talk about another time, but its name is pretty self-explanatory for what we need it for. And finally, we have tempo being important in simplified board states. And when I say it matters, I mean it matters a lot. And the reason why it's so important is because in a simplified board state, each card, each action you take is a larger percentage of the total resources that you have access to. And even the slightest change in a speed advantage could be the difference between the opponent stabilizing or not stabilizing. And I'm sure we've all been there where both players are completely out of gas and you're relying on like a 1500 beater to try to close out the game. And like I see the 40 turn clock meme thrown around, but honestly, if it works, it works. But in essence, within a simplified board state, you can't be relying on long-term or complex strategies. You need to try to maximize the efficiency of every card you do have access to in order to try to win the game. Like, the last thing you want to be doing is holding on to a playable card just because it could be better next turn if you draw something with it. And I'd say within a simplified board state, tempo really matters the most. So that was a big informational dump. So let's take a step back and actually watch some gameplay to see some of these theories in action. Now, I don't want to break down my own gameplay because I'm obviously not good enough yet at the game to really be able to do that. And instead of breaking down my own gameplay for this, I decided that it would be better to break down the gameplay of some of the most seasoned players in this game. Because I truly believe that the best players in the game apply these principles intuitively without even knowing the terms. And the game I want to break down with you guys is actually from the recent YCS that happened this weekend, Round 13, Pack vs. Sam. Now, I didn't just pick this game because it's Pack and Sam, and I'm hoping that some of their viewers may trickle down to my little video, though it definitely wouldn't hurt. But I mostly picked it because Pack and Sam are on the same team. And for those of you who don't know what a team is within the competitive card gaming space, think of it like the card gaming equivalent of being in a boy band. They share a group name, wear similar outfits, but most importantly for our purposes is that they're playing the same deck, card for card. Because remember how I said tempo usually matters the most in mirror matches? Well, these are two of the best players in the game, in a mirror match, in a tournament game that neither of them wants to lose. And I think we can all learn a lot from breaking down a game like this. And going into game 1, Pack makes a Dracotail end board. And there's really not much to say about this turn. Pack really didn't have to play through any interruption. He just made his Dracotail end board and passed it to Sam. But when we get to Sam's turn, that's when things get interesting. So keep in mind, based on our theories, that currently Pack has the tempo advantage, and since Sam is at the tempo disadvantage, he needs to play in a way that wins tempo back. And winning that tempo back should be his only goal. And out of any opening play that Sam could make in this game, he sets a monster in defense position. Now, as the viewer, we know that that face down monster is just a bluff. And if Pack doesn't react to it at all, then this game just turns into a one-sided blowout. But this is a perceived threat, and the risk of this being Albaz is too great to Pack. So Pack decides to respond, which in that moment starts to win Sam back some tempo. So Pack activates Dracotail Flame, targeting his own card to try to trigger the Gulamel to pop the face down monster. Now Sam has a decision to make here. He could just let the chain resolve and go, haha, gotcha, there was a bluff the whole time. But instead, he's recognizing that he won tempo in this trade, and if he can keep that pressure going, he can probably force more interactions out of Pack. So he doubles down to protect the perceived threat and uses Bell to negate the flame. And Pack ends up taking the bait and uses Zora to negate the bell and pop the face down monster, finally revealing that the face down monster was Dracotail Frixel the whole time. Now at this point, most of the publicly known interruptions are used up. Sam has successfully won the tempo swing. Sam uses Fallen and the Virtuous to pop Sacratarian Dragon, and then his Rahu gets Ash Blossomed. And I mean, that's just Yu-Gi-Oh, man. What can I say? And even though Sam lost game 1, I think there's a lot to learn from how he played that game. Like, only using a Ghost Bell and a Dracotail Frixel, Sam was able to deactivate two of Pack's biggest threats. Sam was able to win tempo and create an opening for himself to potentially maybe even win the game. And while you can't account for an unknown Ash Blossom, how many of you could say that you would have found that opportunity in that play to try to get yourself back into the game? Because I know I would not have found that play. Also, side note while the player's side deck here, is Billy just slipped $20 every time he says heart of the cards? Because I feel like he says it a lot.
And they're just going to have to put their faith in the heart of the cards. And the heart of the cards. The heart.
Billy, blink once if you need help. But anyway, moving into game 2, Sam actually picks Pack to go first. Now, there's actually a lot to unpack here. Because I'll be honest, I was workshopping a video about side deck theory, and Sam's decisions here kind of makes me scrap that whole video. Because I was under the impression that the side deck is used for mostly silver bullets to create non-games, but here Sam is using it for a pure tempo game. Now there's more to it than that. Sam also understands the Dracotail theories where you side out the trap cards going into game 2 if you're not going first. But Sam ignores that and kind of just does his own thing here. Because remember how I said an important part of winning tempo in a mirror match is by breaking parity? Well, this is exactly what Sam is doing here. And this move pays off for Sam because in Pack's first turn, it turns out that he did side out his trap cards. And as a result, Pack makes a really underwhelming game 2 end board. And then Sam starts his turn with Kashtira Fenrir, which is something I kind of want to talk about for a moment real quick. And no, I'm not going to sit here like, wow, Sam played a Fenrir. What a big brain move. Like, come on, it doesn't take a lot of brain power to slap a Fenrir in the play. But it's more of a discussion of why Fenrir is even in the side deck in the first place. Because remember how I said I think there's some Yu-Gi-Oh cards that are specifically designed to win tempo? Well, I think Fenrir is one of those cards. Fenrir isn't immediately removing a threat. All it's doing is being there and forcing the opponent to make decisions around the Fenrir, which if Pack is put into a situation where he now needs to play around Fenrir, that wins Sam tempo because Pack is now responding to Sam's board. And Sam carries his tempo swing all the way to the finish line of game 2, and he's constantly resolving plays that attack Pack's known interruptions, where eventually Sam is able to resolve a Magistus combo completely uninterrupted. and then Pac scoops up the game. Now, was Sam going to OTK him and win on that turn with the Madras's combo? No, probably not. But because Sam was so far ahead in tempo, Pac just sees the writing on the wall and calls it a game 2. And again, I think this is just a really good example of tempo manipulation in this game. From the very start of game 2, while side decking, Sam had a plan to break parity and win tempo, and he carried out that plan masterfully. Sam wasn't looking for OTK lines or silver bullets to prevent Pac from playing. Instead, he was systematically attacking threats and making sure that he maintained that tempo game that he won. He simply wanted to keep the game at the pace that he wanted to play at, and that's exactly what tempo is. And unfortunately for game 3, it's not very exciting. Pac goes first again and builds a full Draco Tail end board, and he only needed to play around Effect Veiler, so that's not hard for a Draco Tail deck. When it passes the Sam's turn, he goes for the Fenrir again, but this time Pac doesn't react. And by not reacting, Pac maintained all of his tempo advantage. So then Sam tries to enter battle phase to try to gain some sort of tempo swing off of Fenrir, and Pac just horns the Fenrir back to Sam's hand. Now, I was in the chats, I saw a lot of people wondering why he used horn on Fenrir, considering that Sam can just replay Fenrir out of his hand. And this is a concept called forcing errors, where Pac is basically forcing Sam to waste actions instead of wasting cards. It's its whole other theory that involves controlling tempo with low impact cards. Maybe we'll talk about it another time. But also by entering the battle phase, Sam telegraphed to Pac that he doesn't have enough gas to break the end board on its own. And because Pac barely reacted to the Fenrir, at this point Sam pretty much just sees the writing on the wall. But I respect him for trying to play it out anyway. Pac's Zora negates Femina and pops Sam's Fenrir, and then Sam's Draco Tail Ketu gets flamed, and the game ends there. And while Sam's tournament did end there for the day, I think there was a lot to learn from watching them play. I think there's a lot of value in breaking down these games because a lot of these principles they do intuitively. They've been playing the game for so long that it just comes natural to them. But at the end of this, what do you guys think? Did I convince you that tempo exists in Yu-Gi-Oh? Or is this just fake news in the ramblings of someone who plays way too many card games? It's probably a little of both, but I know I learned a lot making this video, so if you guys learned something too, then that's a win to me. And before I go, provided I didn't mess anything up, there should be something floating around here that you can click on to go check out some more of my other videos if you thought this was cool. But until next time, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Love you guys. Bye.